start the 20 minutes, Kate. Don't worry, we won't be like that, Chair. So good afternoon, everybody, and maybe you can start the recording. And welcome to today's informal seminar session. And we have the great pleasure of having Katherine Brubacher. I don't know how you pronounce it, as our speaker today. And maybe I let, just a second. See, I had prepared I also have some issues with my connection. So maybe, Sargam, I let you introduce Katherine, or I can do, no, because my link is not working there. Wait a second. Yeah. My apologies. Give me just 1 second. Closed. Okay, so I'm not going to explain what the informal seminar is, other than saying that it's a space for students to share their research, in progress research. But today, Kathy is more than in progress, is finished, so it's even more special. To share with other students and possibly faculty, and trying to be together in a supportive, safe and supportive space for students to discuss their research. Katie is a doctoral candidate in CTL, and with 15 years of teaching experience, including 12 years of teaching in Ontario elementary schools, 2 years in a secondary school in England, and 2 years of ESL adult education internationally in the Czech Republic and in Ontario. Katie brings a wide breadth of teaching experiences and knowledge to her position. Kathy's research interests include language learning, classroom-based research with children, literacy, and teacher development. She has published several articles and book chapters, as well as receiving numerous scholarships. She's also worked in teacher education, instructing teacher candidates in classroom-based teaching methods, elementary literacy education, and middle school teaching. Her skills are best suited for supporting students with research proposals, lessons and unit planning, course papers, and research publication. And today, Kathy is presenting her thesis, which is on exploring the boundaries of emotion and language, elementary school newcomers with emerging print literacy as co-researchers. So please join me in welcoming Kathy to this informal seminar series. And it's up to you.
Oh, well, thank you for that welcome. I am trying to share my screen. Is it possible to have that enabled?
Yeah, Sargam, you have to make it a co-host.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Co-host, please. Okay, great.
There we go. Okay. Oh. Okay, so I'm Katie, and I'm here to tell you about my dissertation, and I won't repeat the title. Okay, so my research is funded by SSHRC at FO and OGS. Thank you very much. And just to give a little context of my research before I start, the students who I'm going to be talking about today in the Ontario context are supported by something called the English Literacy Development Program. And this is a program, in the ministry's words, it's designed for students from grades 3 to 12 who have limited prior schooling. I have been a teacher for many years, working with children who would be labeled with this program and supported in classrooms. And so I really was interested in my PhD research to go deeply into some work with this group of children. Okay, so in general, children who I'm going to call newcomers with emerging print literacy, I'm trying not to describe the children as limited. I know that that's generally what's used in the research and the policy, but instead, you know, I like to understand the children as having emerging print literacy. They're learning to read and write for the first time. And generally, this group of kids is lumped into the larger research on refugee children, or sometimes like on multilingual children, bilingual education. And so there have been a number of studies, and there's extensive research in this larger area, and some of the theoretical frameworks and approaches that have been used have been culturally responsive pedagogy, Bronfenbrenner's model, and critical pedagogy, identity work. And there's been two very large-scale studies in the Canadian context by Stewart, and many years ago in Toronto by Capriel and Churchill. The two areas I want to focus on are translanguaging and emotion, because these are concepts I'm bringing into my research. So some people are beginning to use the idea of translanguaging when working with refugee students. So for example, Bigelow in 2017 did a project with Somali refugee students in high school. And she worked with them looking at their Facebook posts and how they were combining Somali and English. And that was a great translanguaging space for written text in their Facebook online posts. And Saskia Style has done some work as well in Ontario to bring a translanguaging approach to working with migrant Mennonite youth in rural settings, and have the teachers use translanguaging. Emotion has begun to move into the area of language and literacy research. And Warundin, a previous student from OISE, he created a model where he brought Sarah Ahmed's work on emotion into critical literacy to take it away from such a rational approach. And Liana Jinkana-Garaja have also looked at the idea of linguistic shame in their research more recently. So my research, I'm going to focus solely on the newcomers with emerging print literacy. Some of the children may have a refugee status, others do not. That wasn't a consideration for my research. The children I work with are in grades 4 to 6. A lot of the research has been done in secondary school, some in upper elementary. So it was great to work with a younger group of children. And what I did is I co-researched with these children to better understand the emotions that were shaping their literacy practices and identities. I really wanted to understand who the students were from their own perspectives, and also to translanguage in different modalities. So, through videos and in their written text whenever possible. So these are the three theories that I used to frame my study. I think all of you know what translanguaging is. The full linguistic repertoire is the use of a person's full linguistic repertoire without adhering to named and official languages and boundaries. The sociality of emotion might be, a newer concept for some of you. Basically, emotion, this theory looks at how structures like the nation assume emotions on the body. Emotion is not just psychological, but also social. Emotions take us deeper into an issue or idea. They are political. Structures like structures and histories assume emotions on the body. So those are some of the ideas around the sociality of emotion. And I understand identity to be strategic and positional. There are more fragmentations than unifications. And so for my theory, with Sarah Ahmed's work, emotions come both from within a person and from without a person. They are assumed both on the body and from within. And so the social positions and the translanguaging are couched within those two. That's why I put it both in and out there in my image. These are my three research questions. The first one is, who are newcomers with emerging print literacy? The second two are very much the same. However, the third one is about how the students understand emotions that are associated with and shape their identities and literacy practices. So there's room for both facts, the students' understanding and ones that I was seeing in the research and ones that teachers identified too. So this research is a series of critical and collective case studies. So a case study has defined boundaries and is centered on description, inference, and interpretation. I also worked with the children as co-research. I was inspired by Gail Fassad's work. I like the idea of elevating this group of students to the position of researcher. And also I employed Paris's humanizing research design, which is really much comes out of Paulo Freire's work, and it's about sharing parts of your own identity along with the students. That's a really important part of this type of design. So for my case studies, I had 3 case studies at 3 different school sites. I did a minimum of 20 half days or 50 hours at each study site. At case study site, the students produced a series of plurilingual texts. So I took pictures of the students writing. Sometimes they wrote poetry. I took pictures of computer screens, wherever they wrote, and I really tried to encourage a lot of translanguaging in those plurilingual texts. The students also produced a lot of multimodal literacy profiles on Flipgrid. There were videos taken. The students were given choice. There were some required ones around their linguistic portraits and places they had lived. So here are my 3 research questions and my data collection tools. The literacy profiles and plurilingual text went into answering all of the questions. I also interviewed teachers, which really influenced, helped me triangulate who the students were, some of the numbers on how long they've been in the country, that type of thing. And I had my own field notes. And of course, the focus group interviews where the students worked with me as co-researchers. There was a lot of scaffolding to get them ready for that point. And, we used pictures, words, lots of different pieces, and they analyzed each other's videos for emotions. And we had discussions about it. So 4 teacher participants, because at one school site, my students were integrated quite a bit. So I had the homeroom teacher as well as the ESL teacher as my teacher participant. 2 school sites had 4 kids and 1 had 6. Lots of different languages, and we can see 8 boys and 6 girls. Okay, so there were a lot of findings. These are some of the major findings, which I cannot talk about today. I did the descriptive analysis. I really want to get in today the written language and desire and print literacy humiliation, and maybe talk a little bit about love of the nation. But there were lots of other themes as well, and emotions. So who are the students? So this was my descriptive analysis. And also, like, the kids said this too, and I thought, well, they really drew my attention to it. They are loving family members. It was very important to them. It's one of the first themes that came up in the focus group interview and one of the interviews, and all the students were seeing that in their identities and in their poetry and their writing, that they really loved their families and talked about their families a lot. And I kind of at first thought, okay, what's the big deal about that? Like, their kids, they love their families. But, now that I myself have been at home with my son for 2 years, missing a lot of formal education, I kind of understand it. Your whole bubble, your whole life becomes your family. And so I think that has a lot of pedagogical implications in terms of, like, we really need to get families into the classroom more. And maybe even have families when they first arrive in Canada learning with the kids in the classroom. The kids were also regional migrators. Before they came to Canada, they lived in lots of different places. And, some of that may be more obvious with the Syrian students moving to Jordan and Lebanon before coming to Canada. But, even like I had the students come from Mexico, and they talked about living different parts of Mexico before they migrated for economic reasons to Canada. And, the Tibetan students lived in India for a while and learned Hindi. So the kids were plurilingual. They had been exposed to lots of different languages. It wasn't just a simple bilingual thing. I know my home language. I'm here in Canada learning English. There was so much going on. They were very sophisticated in that way. So written language and desire. So that may have all been true, but the children really desired to learn to read and write, and they predominantly wrote in English. So written English in this study is seen as a desirable thing, which much emotion is attached to. I saw kids throughout all of my case studies erasing their work, asking teachers how to spell words. There was a lot of frustration, fear of getting started, wanting to get it perfect and write with this perfect English in their writing. So it was great when Amira and Cairo, two young ladies, Amira is from Syria and Cairo is from Afghanistan, they started talking about this and identifying it in the videos in their focus group interview. So Amira said, so when I read, I feel happy, but when I write, I don't feel that happy. I don't like it that much. And Cairo responds later, talking about writing, no, not so much sentence, my fingers hurt when I write in this hand. I can't write, I'm so mad, angry. And so I talked with the girls about this for a while, and I tried to just get them to go deeper. And Amira, a little bit later in the conversation reflects, because if you get good marks, well, we will be good and we will know how to read and write. And that's important because we want to work at a job. We need to know how to read and write and do everything and talk in English. So, here you can already see these two girls understanding
in this like kind of neoliberal agenda and colonial space that is Canada, that how these like English only policies are really influencing these children to desire to read and write in English. It's pushing them to reject their previous literacy practices. Also in this classroom, the teacher had a very strict English only policy. And so one of the things I identified in the case study was print literacy humiliation. So in order to get into the one classroom, the teacher wanted me to help her with her guided reading program, and then I could go do my research stuff. So that was kind of the deal for getting access to the site. And so it was like a grade 2 level. These were grade 5 students, but it was a grade 2 level English only, culturally inappropriate, not age appropriate reading program. So it's of no surprise when I was reading with the kids that I saw them start to actively humiliate and taunting each other about their reading abilities. You know, working in this English only environment, you know, led to shame and embarrassment. And I'm kind of labeling this print literacy humiliation, this process that the children went through. So some of the things I tried to do in kind of a subversive way in the classroom, yes, we had to read these books, but afterwards I tried to think of how can I connect this to a written task that is that has more translanguaging in it. So, you know, we had procedural writing. So I had the students write out, you know, recipes and language lists in multiple languages. And the kids didn't always know the words in their languages. They hadn't learned to read and write. And so they had to rely on each other as experts kind of taking away from some of the teacher authority, but the students then gain authority and become the experts, and their literacy practices are appreciated in the classroom. And then another theme was love of the nation. So Sarah Ahmed talks about how love can push a particular ideal onto others by requiring that they live up to an ideal to enter the community. So the children, in order to enter this community, had learned that to be loved by Canada is to speak English, and also to describe Canada as being safe. So this great little video came up that really showed this. Fatima has only been here for a short time, and her friend has been here longer. They're both from Syria. Then we went to Canada too. And then after we went to Canada, her friend whispers for her. She says, I love Canada. So then Fatima says, I love Canada because in Canada, everyone, and her friend whispers safe. So she says safely and respectful. And when you do something kind, the police come. And in Canada, 7 years, her friend corrects her, then it says 7 months. So she says month. And I wish you enjoyed the video. So here you see Fatima performing this love of Canada as being a safe space. This was done before the pandemic. So what does all of this mean? I don't know how much time I have left, but we see how the desire to learn English, which is already circulating in Canada before the students arrive, shapes how the students understand their own literacy practices. Writing in English becomes a sticky object, creating a boundary that students' languages cannot cross. In this way, the desire to learn English shapes what literacy is. The children have already learned that they must move away from their own linguistic repertoire when writing and towards this English object of love, an object that is shaped by histories of colonialism. Through the anger the children associate with their writing, we see the beginning of resistance. At other times, the children turn to self-hatred, participating in print literacy humiliation. This object of love is so far outside of themselves that they begin to associate embarrassment and shame with their own identities. Other times they perform a narrative of Canada as safe, a safe nation. Another way they express their love of Canada, which in turn negates their previous experiences. By bringing emotion and translanguaging together, we go deeper into the histories and inequitable structures that affect how the students shape themselves and their literacy practices. English-only structures are not just about rights and resources, they are violent and exclusionary practices that deeply harm how the students understand themselves as writers and literacy users. They bind the children with shame. I hope that by framing a translanguaging stance with emotion, teachers can better understand the harm their pedagogies can bring to the classroom when so much of who the student is excluded. And here I've brought that model that I showed you at the beginning back And instead of the emotions within and without, I've just shown the emotions in my study that are stuck on the students' social positions and literacy practices and translanguaging. So future directions, I didn't talk about digital literacies, but one idea is the kids talked about Fortnite all the time. So I thought that might be a fun way to make literacy more engaging and relevant to the kids, is to talk about it in terms of multiplayer shooting games. Not my thing, but it's theirs. There's a lot of laughter when the kids were overtly translanguaging. So I thought maybe I should do a study on that. So I have lots of different ideas, but anyway, that's the end. So I do have my work cited here, my email, but you can see the different resources I touched on here. Okay.
Thank you very much.
How far over was I?
Thank you.
You weren't, you actually had time left.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Okay, so I could have done the future
2
directions
minutes.
more. Okay. Okay,
You
that's
can
good.
still talk about that if you want. I like this idea of the laughter and translanguaging the laughter, because we don't, and in general, emotions is one thing that interests a lot me also, since my PhD thesis. So yeah, the idea of investigating this aspect, it's interesting because you gave both the humiliation and then this is the counter thing, no? It's like the positive, laughing, even if you have mistakes or doubts, but you can do in a nice perspective, whereas the other is feeling not good enough. I think that would be a very good topic for future, on the basis of your research to move forward, just comparing the factors that bring to one versus the other. Because sometimes we are a bit naive. We think that because they are in the same class, things will automatically always work well. But I liked that you pointed at this internal, if I understood correctly, like making fun in a bit of a nasty way of each other. Huh? Yeah. So
yes, yeah. There's this, I think, this deep-rooted shame that comes out, especially around literacy, like not knowing how to read and write. I found the children reacting to this program, it just it wasn't appropriate to them, right? And it just triggered that emotion that came out, and they started taunting each other. Yeah. And it's something I saw, like, I know when I first started teaching many years ago, I saw that as well, before I really understood how important bringing kids' languages into teaching was, and I really do believe that it's an important aspect of just getting the kids engaged, loving, playing with language. And I think translanguaging really allows children to play with language and have fun and laugh with language and writing, as opposed to it being something that's hard and makes you angry, right?
Yeah. No, the idea of playing with languages is core to all the research it's core to translanguaging, but it's core also to the entire plurilingual vision, the idea of going and thinking of language as something that you can really analyze, play, go see the differences, build on them, invent things, break those rules, etc. And come back. Yeah. Sargam, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your research. I really resonated with a lot of what the students were talking about. I mean, as an immigrant myself, I remember being on the airplane with my dad, like coming to Canada and like looking at Canadian money and like learning what that money looked like and what new words were that I hadn't heard before. So like distinctly remember learning certain words for the purpose of coming to Canada. And especially when you pointed out the quote of "this is a safe place," I definitely resonated with that as well as a child. Could you talk a little bit more about whether you saw like groups of similar languages forming? Like, did anybody feel othered at all if there were groups of like only Hindi speakers kind of talking their same language, or was it more that the classroom is pretty much all English and translanguaging is an outside force? I guess that's something that's we should look at this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had 3 different school sites. The one that was English only, the instructor was very much pushing that. We have, there were Pashto speakers and Arabic speakers in the classroom, and she very much did not want them to use their languages, to speak English only. And that was interesting too, because she even a lot of time had a high school co-op student who was Syrian in the classroom who could have like really worked with the kids in Arabic. So that was her philosophy. And I don't know, I think it may have been, she was a new immigrant, or not new, but she was an immigrant, and like she spoke different languages herself, multiple different languages. So I think it may have been a, like something around professional development, not understanding, but that was part of the reasoning, what you just gave, right? Is that, we need to include all students. However, the other schools, one of the other school sites where I was at, the teacher was like, no, like there was actually, she said, it's actually no point, and like, they just start shouting at each other across the classroom in their languages, like, let the kids sit together and speak their own languages. And so that definitely happened. And like, the kids were sitting in language groups, but there was still a strong sense of camaraderie in the classroom. They were still friends. They'd switch back and forth between English in Spanish or English in Hungarian. Yeah. I don't think that it did that. Yes, the kids were more likely to work with people who had similar linguistic repertoires to them, because then they could use a lot more of their language practices, right? And that makes a lot of sense. Just like the teacher in that classroom, she spoke Greek, and one of her friends also spoke Greek, and she came in the class and they were sometimes speaking Greek or English. Like, so it kind of yeah, I mean, that's kind of the reality, right? Of the workplace, of life. And when we have so many different languages, we do need to learn to go in and out. And but we do we are drawn to people who have similar linguistic repertoires to us. So because that's a big part of our identities, right? So it's important to be able to use them. I think my 3rd school site, there were a large number of Tibetan students. And I mean, I think it made sense. Like the teacher had in the classroom had, like, they were sitting with their buddies. It wasn't just that all the Tibetans sat on one side and the other kids that weren't sat somewhere else. But they often, like, they were in like multi-level groups at their sitting area, but they always had someone who spoke their same language sitting beside them they could support each other. Yeah. So, there's lots of different ways you can work with that. That's just kind of your job as a teacher, right? So to move in and out of different languages and provide students opportunities. Yeah.
Thanks for that insight.
I wonder if this teacher, the English only policy, did they change at the end of your study? Like, did you have a chance to discuss further
I tried. I was scared at times I was going to get kicked out of the room. So no, I don't think she did. The whole school had this policy. It was interesting. It was a school that had a lot of interesting things happening. But when I went around and looked at all the bulletin boards, they really multicultural. They had great things about Indigenous peoples. like the kids culture minus their language, right? But it was all English only, except for like the rules. They managed to like get someone to translate them and put them on the walls. So I think it was a school culture piece at that school. I think that was a big part of it, because really both that teacher, Alexandra, that's her pseudonym, and Gina, the Greek-speaking woman, both of them were relatively new to these roles. I think it was like their second year working in the classroom with these kids. They were experienced classroom teachers, but they'd been at their schools for a long time. And so I think maybe like the way things had been set up, the previous teachers who'd been in that ESL position had kind of create that school culture. The whole, and the principals, everyone, right? And so they were kind of leaning on that a lot. Alexandra, with the English only policy, like she actually said, you know, my program comes from my heart. She was a very passionate, caring woman. She had all this trauma-informed pedagogy. But, you know, she hadn't really attended professional development, and she didn't think it was important. And I think that was like a really key piece. And I wonder too how like her experience as an immigrant and having to go through like the Canadian immigration system and having to learn English and having to get into the system and, you know, having an accent that was different than the Canadian accent, like how all these things affect her in her view, and like thinking, well, I want these kids to be successful. This is what I had to do, right? So I think there's so many things that go on that make it a challenge. And like a translanguaging pedagogy is, or plurilingual pedagogy, any type of any of these is very radical in the Ontario education system. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's why I tried, I mean, in my recent project, we had a group of almost 100 teachers in Italy, in Lombardy, using action-oriented plurilingual pedagogies. And the reason why I asked that is that a lot of our teachers changed really their minds after like seeing that first of all they discovered about their students, because it was not so apparent how the students were, what was their background. For some it was, but for some it was not. And the fact that the students could include their own languages changed completely the dynamic in the class, and the teachers made the teachers reflect so much and basically not want to go back to the way they did before. It was not like here in many schools there is really a policy like English only. It was not so strict, but people still didn't use any other languages. It was Italian was the language of schooling, period. And they were learning English or French or Spanish or German. So the only language actually used in the class was the target language and a little bit of the school language of schooling, because that was it. But the others were invisible. And so, yeah, there was a big change in mentality later.
That's wonderful. I don't know if I was there long enough. I wonder if like doing a full year ethnographic, and that's a suggestion I had, like going into a classroom, doing a full year ethnographic study. You know, you may be able to erode or change some of the lens. I think, you know, people have different reasons. Some people are more open to it and others are not. The other piece to look at is the difference in the student population. The children that I was working with, they haven't learned how to read and write in their languages. So a lot of times I find teachers are like, okay, I go to these workshops, people tell me use the kids' languages, have bilingual books. They can't read it. Like, why should I do it, right? And sometimes it's hard for the kids, but some of the strategies, so that's why I really tried out some different strategies. Like, so some of the things I noticed the kids did when I asked them to try writing in their languages, using other languages besides English in their writing. Was, you know, one boy went out in the hall and he saw someone he knew how to write Arabic, and he asked him to come in the class and help him, right? The group of Hungarian boys, these were Hungarian boys who also spoke Roma. They didn't really use a lot of Roma in the classroom. It was mainly Hungarian. And they would go to each other, and like I would ask them, how do you write this one word in Hungarian? And like all of a sudden 3 or 4 of them, they'd be standing up, they'd be around the table, they'd be talking like for 2 or 3 minutes, like there was this really intense, exciting debate about how to write it, and which is wonderful, right? Like to have this level of excitement. But it's not like a simple thing where I can just, you know, go grab a bilingual text and put it out there and, you know, the kids can read it and okay, you know, it's there's a lot more, you have to be a lot more creative in how your approach. And that's also one of my suggestions about having the families. So when the families first come and arrive in Canada, a lot of these parents are going into link classes. Like, why don't we just have the families and the kids all together in the classroom, you know, learning the curriculum. I mean, learning some English, yes, that does need to happen, but hopefully not at the expense of all of the rest of the students' linguistic repertoire, but like doing that together. And then you really have a resource in that room who knows the kids' languages. And it's hard because, I mean, it's great too if you can have the classroom teacher. Like I'm working part-time at middle school right now, and you know, one of my colleagues is actually she teaches in the international languages program. She teaches Punjabi, so you know, it's great to have her there and have her working with our kids. So that's wonderful, but that's more of an established community. She's been there a long time. It's hard when you have like waves of new immigrants, especially, you know, kids with refugee background for different reasons coming. You don't know what school they're going to go to, and to have the staff takes a little bit of time. So, you know, that's just, I don't quite know how logistically that would work, but I kind of feel right now with everything that's happening in schools, even with my son, like I want to get in his classroom. So I kind of feel like, you know, because the last 2 years have been a disaster with education. So, and I feel like there's so much going on in that room.
We will be paying for years. Yeah, it's a disaster we will be paying for years. Yeah. Precisely in emotional terms, for example. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question about that actually. You are bringing together theoretically, this is more of an actual FOE question. You're bringing together theoretically different approaches to understand the connection between emotion and language generally, and then theorizing this through translanguaging. And you're bringing these theories together to apply practices you observed and work you did with students. I'm wondering if you can say some more about how this, I mean, marriage is the wrong word, but this connection between sociality of emotion and translanguaging could be used to inform what teachers should be doing or what curriculum could be doing in the classroom.
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit at the end of my implications, but, and you know, that kind of goes back to why I even chose these theories in the beginning. There's something about it that intuitively made sense to me as a teacher, because I think working with these children, I know like I had for years, I'm very aware of all of Jim Cummins' work, you know, and I had been going into the classroom doing the bilingual, having the kids do the bilingual picture books. And then like just there's something around the emotion that the kids, so emotion to me made a lot of sense, almost more than like transferring one language to another. Because that wasn't something that could always happen because the kids didn't know necessarily how to read and write in their languages. Yeah. And but then when I would try and experiment, a lot of times it was experimenting even as a teacher to bring these ideas together, to bring translanguaging, to bring the kids' languages into the classroom in different ways. I noticed a lot of emotion, and I saw a lot of emotion attached to those things. So it kind of made a sense to me, and it almost was more of a reason to do it than the cross-lingual, right, that it's going to develop their English. It's kind of like, oh, like it does something great to their identities and my relationship with them and how they feel in the classroom and their confidence and how they feel about their reading and writing. Like it was almost more important than they were doing better in English because I was teaching, you know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I don't know if
it does, and it helps me understand
Totally. Yeah.
how you came to that choice theoretically. My question though was what you would say more prescriptively in terms of what recommendations would you give to guide teachers? Imagine if you were to turn this work into, say, professional development. So I think it's actually really interesting you said sort of just now that the emotional piece is actually probably more important than the linguistic piece. So what would that mean? And I say that because I know your thesis better than anybody in the room besides you. And we've talked a lot about, was it Alexandra, all this trauma-informed work that had nothing to say about language. And that's a really fascinating contradiction, that somebody who cares deeply about her students and sees the impact of traumatic experiences on their current life in the classroom was not only unable to see that in terms of language practices, but was the strictest of all of them and enforcing English only. So I guess I'm wondering if you can say more about how this theoretical connection between emotion and translanguaging could be used to guide future teaching.
Well, I think like so it's connected to that, in that like with someone like Alexandra, you can see, I think most teachers are really caring. I mean, there's some who are not and really want their students to be happy. They don't want to traumatize their students, right? And there's that triple effect piece, right? So for her, the trauma was about like before they came to Canada, their transition to Canada, and there was a lack of reflection on how what she was doing through English only was traumatizing as well. And so I feel like that by presenting research in this way to teachers and getting them to really understand the emotions and the politics and the emotions and what, you know, behind this like strict English only piece, it's more of an incentive than saying, well, they have language rights, right? I mean, we can have an intellectual argument about that, but I don't think teachers want to harm their students, right? So, and I think this is, I see that as a teacher. I think English only policies cause harm to children. That's what I see, and that's kind of something I've noticed more and more as a teacher when I just see how connected the kids become to me when I start like doing translanguaging pedagogies and ideas with the kids. I'm like, well, if this is so important to them and it deepens our relationship, like, what does that say about when we're not doing that, how destructive it is, right? To the children, and how they view literacy, how they view themselves, both of those things. Is that answering your question, Jeff? Kind of.
Almost. I mean, ask one more time.
Like I'm
what would you say to current teachers how to think about the connection between emotion and translanguaging to inform their teaching? Not to look backwards, but to say for like their future practice, what do they need to know?
They need to know that this concept of print literacy humiliation happens in classrooms that are English only. There is more joy and happiness and excitement around writing. I didn't get into that, but in this presentation, in a classroom where there wasn't. Even though if you actually look at the students' writing and you're going to have a prescriptive English grammar approach, like this writing might not be as good as this one, like, but the kids still felt a lot more, they felt a lot better about being at school, about their literacy practices. I mean, that's, yeah. And I think shame is a strong word, like humiliation, right? It's, and a lot of times I think people will mistake those emotions for trauma from the past. So, but I think kids who've been traumatized in the past
have they may have less ability to withstand oppressive structures in the classroom. Does that make sense? So so they're acting up more, they're misbehaving, and so it's more overt. But that doesn't mean that all the plurilingual students in that class are not like silently imploding. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, is that, am I answering it better there?
Yes.
Okay.
I also have to go at 4:30. Can you please stop recording? I have feedback for Katie and the actual presentation that doesn't need to be recorded.
Sure. Thank you so much, Katie.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. I'm just gonna stop recording now.